Hello, we are back. My name is Caroline Ncube. I'm based here at the University of Cape Town at the SARChI Chair in Intellectual Property Innovation and Development. It's my pleasure to be chairing this session. It's going to be a fantastic session, and I will take a few minutes to introduce the session and our keynote speaker, and then we'll get going. So the topic of our session is accessing and protecting African knowledge systems and knowledge equity, combating data colonialism and recognizing traditional knowledge, a global South agenda. Quite a mouthful, right? But I think it's really, really important. And as I was preparing for the session, I thought one of the best ways to characterize it is that it is a session about thinking, right? It's about setting a global agenda, global South agenda for research in this area. And we have a fantastic keynote speaker to set us well on our way to thinking about this. But before I introduce him and hand over to him, I wanted to say to you one of the best pieces of advice that I got about conceptualizing research when I was doing my PhD was this mentor said to me, "What's the stone in your shoe, Caroline? What actually bothers you about this topic? Why do you want to dedicate 5 to 6 years of your life to this topic?" And I sat there and thought for a while, and after a week I came up with it. And then she said to me, "Right, now you have it. If you solve that problem, you won't limp into the future." So as we listen to what our keynote is going to tell us about, I want us collectively to ask ourselves this question. For the global South, what is the stone in our shoe when it comes to thinking about traditional knowledge and data colonialism? If we ask that question sincerely and soberly, and mind what Chidi is going to tell us, we should not limp into the future. When we live today, we should have a clear research agenda that we're going to work on and then tread boldly into the future and tackle this problem. So, our keynote speaker is Professor Chidi Oguamanam, who is research chair in bioinnovation, Indigenous knowledge systems, and global knowledge governance at the University of Ottawa in Canada. He is one of the leaders of the Open African Innovation Knowledge Project, a key global scholar on this area. I know I do not need to say anything further about him. He's very well known to all of us here. And if you don't know Chidi, where have you been? Get your phone out and Google. Seriously. Or find me at lunch. I'll bring you up to speed. But having said that, Chidi, I'm so glad you're here with us, and I'm really looking forward to listen to what you'll tell us about, and finally get rid of that stone in my shoe. Over to you.
I am coming from Cape Town, from Johannesburg. So it's been a very long journey for us, to say the least. Can I have my slide on? And I've been basking in a lot of hospitality beyond I can express my gratitude. And so I thank all my friends who have made it possible to treat me like a pope. If you know where I'm staying, you will know. So thank you very much. It's been a wonderful opportunity. I had one of my very close friends, Tobias Shonweda, say this morning that when he teaches this idea of a copyright as a property, that students continue to Google or to do something with their cell phone without paying attention. And listen, one other thing I teach in the law school is what is called jurisprudence and legal theory. And everybody who has a law degree knows that that is a class you slip off and you don't really care what the heck the professor is saying. So, and I'm going to repeat that today. And so if you are not sleeping, then you know you must be really, really interested. And if you are sleeping, I'll forgive you. Okay, so we've been saying a lot of things about what is going on in South Africa. And I wanted to take some time because a few days back, it was Ian Curry, the counsel for the amicus curiae, who is appearing in court for this copyright bill challenge. He said, we've had all the practice, what about the theory? And today I'm going to answer that question. And this is how I intend to do it. So if you don't understand what the heck I'm talking about, please keep looking at this slide that I'm sharing with you. And let's run quickly around the traditional knowledge, which I describe as inherently and all-round borderless. And TK's defiance of epistemic borders is its reality. Before the current melding of all kinds of boundaries, disciplinary, conceptual, and a lot more, the idea of traditional knowledge is itself a colonial conceit. The qualification of other people's knowledge as cynically traditional presupposes the existence of an authentic or a default knowledge system. So the renewed escalation of interest and consciousness around traditional knowledge globally and on our continent has never been more exciting, as it is also troubling. TK is Africa's significant factor endowment, a very strong, even if less celebrated and less articulated and less harnessed continent's competitive edge. Its subsistence and survival in the digital age is now a stuff for our collective challenge. That is actually the very stone in our shoes. I propose that while there has been a remarkable shift around traditional knowledge, on the teleological realm, that is to say on the practical realm of things, we run the risk of undercutting traditional knowledge's optimal and enduring potential for our continent. We need to first, and I mean first, invest in theorizing traditional knowledge and in tackling the conceptual morass that saddles it. For the privilege of this intervention, I intend to sow some provocative seeds around traditional knowledge. First, do we ignore the epistemic conceit and the very erroneous assumption over the taxonomy of traditional knowledge that I've spoken about not long ago? Maybe yes, because of the inherent risk of red herring. If we spend a lot of theoretical energy quarreling whether it should be called traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge or all that stuff will be happening behind us and we will be losing steam. So second, do we engage the biggest elephant in the room, which is the scope of traditional knowledge? The last question unravels a very important opportunity. It requires a full consciousness at all times of traditional knowledge's defiance of conventional disciplinary boundaries. There has been consistent attempt to trifurcate traditional knowledge into traditional knowledge proper, traditional cultural expressions, and genetic resources. This trifurcation project is a signifier of colonial influences on our epistemic autonomy. In Africa and some non-Western civilizations, our knowledge systems, which for emphasis includes our languages, and we have heard so much about the power of language. Vukosi and a lot of colleagues are doing this, and Melissa on this panel. These languages are the windows to our worldviews. And those worldviews are fundamentally holistic, serving as a glue to our identity as a people, and also a lot more about who we are. So, the trifurcation project or approach is deeply problematic. It has the danger to condition our thinking and our approach to TK in ways that serve the pragmatic purpose of fitting traditional knowledge within established disciplinary boundaries and knowledge governance frameworks. Trifurcation is not only an exercise that happens at the World Intellectual Property Organization or the Convention on Biological Diversity or other places where traditional knowledge is on trial before Western establishments. TK has been subjugated to the characteristic inclination of Western knowledge systems, that is to say, Western science, to dissect ideas into their minimalist compartments and to erect artificial and often highly politicized disciplinary boundaries. And in the paradigm of pitting the West against the rest, or the rest against the West, TK is often profiled within these molecular epistemic models. The consequence of this tendency is the disembodiment of traditional knowledge from its custodians and its ultimate disempowerment as a knowledge system on its own merit and integrity. Here are a few examples I want to suggest. When traditional knowledge is framed around genetic resources, we are forced to pigeonhole it and to defend it in the courts and laboratories of the life sciences. This explains why we focus on TK in agriculture, TK in seeds, in health, in medicines, in pharmacology, ecology, botany, forestry, horticulture, and environmental sciences writ large. To further perpetuate the conceit in each of these fields or disciplines, TK is further devalued with the ethno prefix, if you know what I mean, ethnobotany, ethno-horticulture. And what is this telling us? It is saying that this knowledge system has little prospect for scaling. But we know that the opposite is true. Similarly, when traditional knowledge is framed in the expressive repertoire, we locate it within the established canons of the humanities, the liberal arts, and aspects of social sciences. In this compartment, we focus on traditional knowledge in entertainment, in music, in storytelling, in poetry, folklore, and in songs, arts and crafts, cuisine, gastronomy, and other miscellaneous renditions that fit within Western canons and disciplinary boundaries. But we know these things are lies because a piece of art is associated with a genetic resource through which you want to carve what you have done. And it could be a medicinal plant. And it could be a piece of religion or some degree of spirituality, all of them in one, wrapped as expression of knowledge, people, and their worldviews. So from the prism of the third world approaches to international legal studies, what we call 12 to international law, we see a highly dedicated international legal, political, and institutional orders, and their municipal imitations invested in deepening the balkanization project in contrast to traditional knowledge's holistic essence. These powerful institutions, I would not mention their names, have carved out traditional knowledge in bite sizes, reflecting their politically positioned structures with nuanced jurisdictional contestation over aspects and parts of traditional knowledge in the guise of what I call latter-day TK protectionism. In these institutions, the interests of traditional knowledge holders are often subjugated to the institution's primary loyalty in the defense of their political and economic mandates. In trying to understand the fraught conceptual challenge around TK and its strategic weakening, the biggest evidence is the superimposition of alien knowledge governance framework over traditional knowledge. From Johannesburg to Cape Town, we've been quarreling about a certain concept called copyright. Now, the superstructure of knowledge governance is Western intellectual property. It was designed without regard to traditional knowledge and its producers. The international order has never given any serious attention to alternative knowledge governance model outside the Western intellectual property system. TK and its holders are summoned to the Court of Intellectual Property to plead its validity. Objections to this approach is symbolized by the marginal appeals to sui generis forms of TK protection. The sui generis pathway is consistent with the colonial confinement of other knowledge forms to the periphery. Intellectual property rights are cataloged into diverse, complex, and technical regimes commanding unique legal principles and criteria for rights allocation through, for example, patents, copyrights, trademarks. But categories of intellectual property are not closed. As new IP regimes continue to be created, existing ones are renegotiated based, guess what, on the political influence of innovation stakeholders. And this is one compelling example. In the past few years, there has been a serious traction for the idea of copyright in AI-generated works. And actually, we heard a very excellent presentation yesterday by Professor Ramika, I think it was, who really put some finger on this stuff. But we're talking about copyright for AI-generated works. But centuries of effort have yet to take TK seriously in the contestation over knowledge governance. Now, in the era of data, datification, digitization, machine learning, automation, and artificial intelligence, traditional knowledge's ubiquity and holistic outlook is vindicated. There is no how you can do all of this without, as Andrew was saying today, scraping data from all over the place. Digitization reduces all elements of knowledge, including traditional knowledge, to data sets. These data sets and the methods of their collection, translation, transcription, design, and deployment are now the next existential frontier for traditional knowledge and its holders' struggle for equity and information justice. This conference has touched on that complex dynamic, which many have spoken about already, from Johannesburg and now in Cape Town. A year ago, a coalition of like-minded scholars, thinkers, practitioners, and various stakeholders hermetically went to a place called the Cradle of Humankind. There, in the order of pretend hermits, they agonized on how to navigate the rapid surge of technological tide and its potential for good alongside the real and the present danger of undermining Africa and the global South's interest, especially in traditional knowledge. The result was the 2024 Cradle Principles, published March 12, 2024, soliciting for comments. And this was shortly after the conclave of pretend hermits. In a nutshell, the Cradle Principles on Knowledge Governance recognize the need for equity in the use of digital research tools in the pursuit of information justice to avoid a threat of colonial injustice or a repeat of what we call colonial injustice in the digital space through digital colonialism and exclusionary tendencies. The principles were proposed to avoid wrong uses of traditional knowledge and community-held knowledge and information. It also highlights the role of knowledge governance systems to protect fundamental human rights of knowledge producers and users through equitable dispersal of benefits and collaborative and sustainable forms of innovation. In the digital age, the Cradle Principles emphasizes the need, and I quote, to combat unidirectional informational resource extraction and misappropriation that aggravates inequities and injustice. A year in this technological age is like a decade in the old order. Since the Cradle Principles, ChatGPT has taken the world by storm. Recently, as we have all heard, Chinese DeepSeek has sent those who thought that they were in the commanding heights of the AI rat race, scampering back to the drawing board. The game is on. The race is open. Africa must pursue and strive to recover. Now, these principles, that is to say the Cradle Principles, are principles, and they are just guideposts that attempt to salvage and sustain enduring values amidst disruptive circumstances, in this case, technological circumstances. Now, a few thoughts and strategies to build further on the Cradle Principles is what I will devote to the next few minutes talking about, especially with regard to the dilemma which these technological surges pose for traditional knowledge and our continent's interest therein. First, we must invest as a matter of inclusive disciplinary endeavor in the theorization around traditional knowledge on a more urgent scale than the present attempt to monetize and make everything about traditional knowledge about money. We must lay the foundation of our claim to traditional knowledge on a deep-rooted theoretical enterprise. Because if we settle for monetization easily, the money will go away, the data will disappear, our knowledge, our languages will be sold, and they will be extinct. Second, we must reconsider with intentionality a shift from our pattern of consumption of technology to making our roles as co-creators of knowledge, to taking those roles seriously. And I'm so excited about the Wikimedia Foundation and CISLOS and Co. and all they are doing in this space to begin to really take our ability to generate data and tell our own stories and share it on our own terms. So our participation in the Dataverse, especially through the agency of our continent's youth board, must be designed as an exercise in the curating of a partnership for all-round collaborative innovation, which is what we do at the Open African Innovation Research Project. Even if we cannot, as Vukosi said in Johannesburg, even if we cannot match the hard technological infrastructure, we can effectively negotiate what we contribute to this for the optimal operationalization of these new technologies. So in this shift, we meld the troubled binary of producers and users of data. The miners and the mined in the Dataverse can forge a mutually equitable interest, flipping and switching their roles in access, in benefit sharing, with self-preserving commitment to develop the ethical rubrics for sustainable and equitable knowledge production and governance. Third, recognizing the fundamental holistic orientation of traditional knowledge, we must, as we do in feminist legal studies, ask the woman question. And here we must begin to ask the TK question. Think carefully. When you take your camera, taking pictures, whether it's in a panoramic scale or however, whatever we do as new generation content creators, ask the TK question as a conscious matter. Because a lot of knowledge is being digitized in very accidental manner, but they can still be pulled back for meaningful renegotiation of what Africa brings to the table. So we must continue to ask the TK question and resist being mesmerized by the shallow disciplinary rabbit holes that have underserved and devalued traditional knowledge. Fourth, our cultural heritage institutions, and there's been a lot of that going on throughout this conference, must be empowered to effectively reinvent their role in the increasingly complex dynamic of digital creativity. They must reinvent to reflect the transformation in the value chain of traditional intermediaries and the advent of new ones that defy the reach of conventional regulatory tools. Our library should be more daring and not cower to the threats of IP lawyers, of which I'm one, and try and take this battle to the court of public opinion. And South Africa has a reputation, at least in the AIDS crisis, to take on this battle. And I know there are many lawyers to render free legal service if the need arises. Finally, the business model that over-empowered intermediaries in the creative enterprise is no longer fit for purpose in the digital age. The same is true to a very large extent by implication of the conventional intellectual property system that services that inequitable business model. I suggest that if the miner and the mined, talking about data mining, have equal stakes on how we use information for good, then it is about time we deconstructed and redesigned the role of all stakeholders in between, including most emphatically the intermediaries. This is indeed the hidden lesson in South Africa's struggle for a decent copyright law. And let me close by saying, despite how long it has taken to get this law, or we're about to get it, every effort invested in that exercise is not wasted, because it has given us opportunity to think deeply, and we are most likely to recover the lost days and years by the time the bill is signed into law. And that might be different from those who may have rushed their own and gotten an outcome. All these struggles will lay foundation for expedited implementation of this bill. And by so doing, a lot of education is going on free of charge since this struggle. And that has some parallel to why it took WIPO several years, decades, before there is ever a treaty on traditional knowledge. Thank you very much.
You have keynotes and keynotes and keynotes. That was a keynote. A hand of applause. So thank you, Chidi. I feel like saying, time out, everybody, sit down, reflect, take your notebooks and write 5 key points, right? It's that kind of presentation. You want to sit down and think about it. But we won't do that. So we thank you, but we're going to try and mine from what you said. So I'm going to invite back my discussants and my respondents. But before I invite the in-person respondents, I've got one lined up. Gloria Emuzue is online on Zoom.
Thank you, Prof. That was a wonderful presentation. It reminds me so much of what we're doing in Africa, which is an organization that does data creation that I work with. And talking about IP and copyright issues, for me, I think it brings up a lot of change in attitude for Africans. And for those of us that are involved in data curation, it also calls for change of methods and methodology. In Africa, for instance, we do what we call data farming as against data mining, which is the traditional way of getting data. You go scrape up data, take other people's data. But because we realize some of the issues involved in this, including copyright and use of marginalized and restricted data, we decided to create our own. So through data farming, which runs through the pipeline of everything we do in Africa, we are able to kind of give back in all that we are doing. One of the projects we handled is the Niger Voices project. And in the Niger Voices project, we're able to curate 1,800 hours of audio data sets in 3 Nigerian languages. And in our attempt to do this, we were able to work with over 5,000 language users. Okay, so what helped us to actually scale and succeed in what we're doing is this data farming principle which we have. So our approach to data is not to take and take and take. We rather see it as opportunity to sow seed, just like farmers. We sow seed which we grow into big trees and yield fruits which will now benefit everybody. Now, how does this work in practice? When it comes to getting data itself, we create our own data. We call it data generation or sentence generation. And in doing this, we work with language users in the different language communities. And when we work with them, we also encourage these language users who have donated their voices to also join us as communities, online communities, so that they can monitor, they can know what is going on with the data they have created. And now when we present this data outward for people to use, we have also gotten the kind of license that gives us the opportunity to actually monitor the users. So if you are using the data for purely research purposes, it is free. But if you're using this data for commercial purposes, then we invite you to donate, come up as a member or partner on our platform, where you make some financial donations, which will help us to create more data sets. And of course, who are those creating these data sets? They are the people in our language community. So that way, we end up empowering them more and more financially. And then also, we also end up expanding the corpus or the base of the language we're working with. And then, of course, also we expand the corpus of the data set that we're creating. So we see data set creation as an onward and ongoing process, which doesn't actually have an end. And it's interesting, we've also taken this principle of working to other African languages via what we call the Voice Africa project. So we are currently doing this in working with owners of these languages in their own various locations. And as I said, when we work with you, we encourage you to join our online community because we believe that language is communally owned. And it is your right to know what is going on with what you have done. Okay, so I will just pause there a bit because I know others might have things to also say here, but I think, as I said, it calls for reorientation of attitude. And the fact we're in the digital age and nothing is solidized so far, I think that gives us the opportunity to actually try new things. Bring up new things, new methodologies in some of the approaches to what is going on, instead of just inheriting and doing it exactly the way the Western people do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Okay, so what we're going to do now is ask Melissa first, followed by Alan, to respond to the keynote. Just what you think. We had wonderful takeaways. I don't even want to try and paraphrase or rephrase them. It's too much, right? So, Melissa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Melissa Omino. I'm the director at CIPIT, which is the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology Law at Strathmore University. CIPIT is one of the hubs at Open Air, where Prof. Chidi is like my boss. So, as Prof. Carol said, that was a keynote for sure. And when I think about traditional knowledge, especially in the realm of AI and in the use of AI and preservation and curation, all the points that were touched in the keynote make a lot of sense. Especially when you think about the use of what I would call Eurocentric legal frameworks in trying to capture the essence of traditional knowledge. I agree completely that it takes a lot more than that Eurocentric view. Traditional knowledge is holistic, as has been mentioned. It's complicated. But when you think about it in terms of knowledge systems, they tend to relegate it as a lower-end knowledge system. But with the advent of AI and what Professor Gloria has just mentioned, we see that the type of data that is looked for or is being farmed or mined, whichever part of the fence you sit on, within the African continent, is actually traditional knowledge data. Within the climate change sphere, within language or natural language processing, in agriculture, in health as well. And all this is from a tacit knowledge system. So how does the tacit knowledge system meet the emerging technology system? So when I put down my notes, I really put down when Prof. Chidi said that we need to think about rushing to monetize traditional knowledge. And what the young children say, or the Gen Zs, I'm sorry if there are Gen Z in the room, they say that we are losing recipes. And losing recipes means that you're letting something go into the ether. Those of us who like to delve in copyright, we talk about letting things go into the public domain, right? So the recipes that we're losing are the essence of traditional knowledge. And if we are rushing to monetize, we are not losing the recipes, but we are giving the recipes away. And I think that accessing the emerging technology market with traditional knowledge is possible, but not if you're thinking about it as an exchange of money. It can be exchange of something else. I also thought about information access and control, the unique cases of sacred knowledge within traditional knowledge systems, and connecting it to culture and community. All the things that were mentioned in some of the principles, the cradle principles. And I think that aligns, and here comes my plug, very well with the principles that myself and Dr. Weregi came up with in our book chapter on using AI to curate and preserve traditional knowledge, the pros and cons. And all my points were mentioned. Other than, I think the one thing that I would want to mention is the ability to withdraw traditional knowledge from the emerging technology market if your negotiation has not gone the way you feel. And I don't know how to do that. I'm hoping that we can have conversations with technologists about how we can do that, but not saying that we will not participate, because I know Alan, who might be next, is going to have something to say about our participation, but really curating how we can participate. So, wow, a tough act to follow, but I hope I've managed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa.
Hi, my name is Alan Rocha. I'm from Brazil. What I want to say is that TK and TC's, traditional cultural expressions, they're all part of the same cultural realm where we live, where we understand ourselves to be, where we make meaning of everything we do, of what we are and who we are. And that's dynamic. The main difference between TK and TCEs is that the expressions can be felt, seen, observed, while the traditional knowledge is much more abstract. It situates in a more abstract level, while language as a cultural expression can be perceived. Pottery can be perceived. Recipes can be perceived. So what we have is a great scale of things, and they all are within culture, which means our behavior and everything else. Therefore, I think it's very hard, if not impossible, to isolate it, because any cultural set is dynamic, it's public, it derives from interaction and survives from interaction. We can't talk about culture on our own, by ourselves. It's not like my own culture. It's not, the culture I call myself is collectively shared, and it is dynamic, and there are no limits, specific borders on those. So I do not believe that simply avoiding and reacting negatively as distancing ourselves from the challenges, for example, in data farming and so on, and AI, is the best solution. I actually think one of the ways of reacting to it is being more actively taking on our hands and actually developing the instruments before they are developed by others, and therefore making them available for the community to decide what it's going to do with that, or if it wants to do anything with that, if it doesn't want to do anything with that, and so on. And just to finish, and just to make a comparison throughout the open access movement, now we are open science, citizen science, at Fiocruz, which is a health research institution in Brazil, which deals a lot with traditional communities and so on. You need the data and use the specific data to target specific health issues, specific food issues, land issues. And they're not avoiding it. And there's one rule that they created that I'm very happy to be able to be part of it, which is it needs to be as open as possible, as close as necessary. So I think that kind of attitude is maybe the way that we should go facing this challenge. Not avoiding AI, but taking it in our hands. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Sandra, please introduce yourself and take your 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. I think this has been a very enlightening session. And one thing that I took from Chidi's presentation was, first of all, understanding the critical principle on knowledge governance. That was something we were talking about yesterday with Chidi. But also what he said about ask the TK question as a conscious mother. I think that was really powerful because knowledge is powerful, and especially traditional knowledge, which really defines who we are. And just talking about the urgency of knowledge equity in Africa. And we all know that Africans' rich culture, the historical and also the indigenous knowledge has been very much undervalued and also underrepresented, especially in the global knowledge systems. For centuries, we have seen the colonial structures that have been controlled, knowledge production, especially in determining what is preserved, who has access to what, and what is it being used for. And in the digital era, we see that there is really imbalance that continues, especially in the data colonialism, where African knowledge is being extracted, but also digitized, monetized, without the African communities benefiting from it. And that is what also Dr. Chidi highlighted in his presentation. So looking at the critical principle on knowledge equity, which really emphasizes Africa must take ownership of knowledge, whether traditional, indigenous, or modern intellectual property, intellectual contribution, and also ensure that it's accessible, protected, and also recognized is very powerful, especially me as a Wikimedian, but also a digital rights activist, a women's rights activist. And looking at some of the efforts we have been able to explore, especially in Wikimedia's effort to bridge the knowledge gap by promoting local content, creating open license, but also indigenous language preservation has been powerful. So I also draw to what we have been doing at Women of Uganda Network on our work on data protection and privacy, especially in ensuring that Uganda communities, particularly women and marginalized groups, to maintain control over their digital identity, that is very important, and also the cultural knowledge, that is very important. And looking at also the role of AI and digital technologies, especially ensuring that preserving and also not misrepresenting African knowledge, that is also powerful. So I would also like to comment on what really local equity means for us as an African, as a Ugandan. So it means really African perspectives, the culture, and also the history, as well as represented in the global knowledge system, especially in ensuring that Wikipedia, open source platforms. However, you see that in most cases, in the online knowledge repositories are dominated by content from the global north. I think we all know this. And that is what we are trying to strengthen the African Wikimedia as a whole. So looking at some of the initiatives we have been able to do in Uganda and also the Wikipedia ecosystem at large, projects such as Africa, Wikilabs Women, which is about documenting women's contribution on Wikipedia. And across Africa, women's knowledge and their contribution are underrepresented, especially in history, books, and also the online archives. And projects such as Wikilabs Women has been able to really document the stories of women, their achievements, and also how they have been able to contribute to knowledge. Not just in Uganda, but across Africa and the world. And we have been able to document women in politics, in business, and those who are doing a lot of work on activism. And then also I want to highlight a very important project that we also do that is Wiki Loves Folklore. And this is really an annual project that documented on Wikimedia Commons. And this is Creative Commons when we talk about copyright. So it documents folklore, culture in Uganda. And looking at 2024, what we have been able to document were folk festivals, the folk dance, music, activities, games, and name it. And for the case of Uganda in 2024, we were able to document about 407 images and 27 videos. So this is really us being able to preserve African knowledge and traditional African knowledge. And looking at some of the projects such as art and feminism, which was also a very powerful project for us in Uganda, we're able to gather various women who are using art to preserve African knowledge, traditional African knowledge. So they're able to showcase how they're trying to counter or close the divide on Wikipedia using their art. And several other initiatives, such as Wiki for Refugees, that we are very proud of. So we are able to collaborate with different organizations such as Reliable Refugees, Storytellers, Platform for Africa, and also the Hello World that also a very powerful element, especially when we talk about preserving knowledge on Wikipedia, which requires access to the internet. So they were able to provide access to the internet for us, and we're able to also work with different refugees. As we know, Uganda is one of the countries that host the largest refugees in Africa and the world. So we were able to work with refugees to document a lot of information, especially from South Sudan, using Dinka and the rest of it. So this initiative, I would think that also aligns with what Dr. Chidi talks about on the call for knowledge justice, ensuring that the perspective of women, especially African women, are not also erased from history. And some of the work that we have been able to do around the local content, especially Luganda Wikipedia. I wanted to just highlight the amazing work we have been able to do, especially in preserving traditional African knowledge on Wikipedia and across the world. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Chisita.
I think I'm the last man standing in between the disequilibriums of your stomach and, the need for knowledge to feed the mind as well. So I will try to be laconic. What I can say as a takeaway from Prof's amazing contribution is that he brought in what I can call the concept of heterotopia epistemesis. This refers to the fact that, according to Michael Foucault, we are living in a world where there's diversity, multiplicity, and, you have these variations in terms of culture. And I believe that indigenous knowledge occupies a very unique position, as he highlighted that it's part of what we can call the sui generis aspect, which makes it distinct and unique. And as a result of that, he also brought in the issue that I can call the re-territorialization and deterritorialization of indigenous knowledge. By those concepts, I imply that by deterritorialization, we are looking at how do you decolonize and reclaim, more praxis-oriented, people-oriented legal frameworks, ethical frameworks, and protocols, and the standards for the management of indigenous data, which also then pushes to the intellectual pedestal the issue of data sovereignty, indigenous data sovereignty. Indigenous people do not have control over their data. People come, research on them, governments come, collect data about them, but they do not have access as to how that data is going to be used, as to how that data is going to be, how it's going to affect them in the long run. So with that in mind, I work with IFLA, Indigenous Matters section, and as a collaborative effort in 2020, 2024, we produced a special issue through Taylor and Francis, which is Indigenous Knowledge and Data in Ethical Information Management, with a key focus on data sovereignty of these indigenous people, because the concept of indigenous, it's universal. You find it in Canada, among the Inuit people, the Navajo, the Cherokees, the Sayuks, the Dakota, the Lakota, the Maori, Africa, you have First Nations, the San, the Khoikhoi, the Sandawe, the Hadza, various groups of different Bantu groups, among others. So another issue also that I think Prof brought into limelight is the fact that indigenous data, because of the proliferation of digital technologies and digital platforms, we now also have to confront an issue of digital data capitalism or platform capitalism. And while there are protocols, laws, and other frameworks to protect other forms of knowledge that is regarded as part of the scientific realm, there is no control, there are no laws that control the data of netizens online. And yet the data that we transact or exchange online is the same data that can be used to create patents, copyrights, trademarks, among other IPRs. So we need to recalibrate our minds and rethink on ways on how to confront that aspect of data capitalism by private, independent information practitioners. Where independent information practice on online is good because it has brought in another industry which you can call information consultants and brokerage, or information mediation, among others. But also, there's need to balance issues and see how we can protect indigenous knowledge, and also how do you conflate surveillance, online surveillance, and visibility, as well as safety. So how do you balance surveillance? Because we are now in the surveillance economy, because of the shared economy, how do you balance that with regards to protection of users? Lastly, to conclude on that, libraries, I think, as the epistemological institutions, they need also to embrace new ways, new models, holistic diagnostic models that are based on not only Ubuntu Goji, but also that are based on what we can call meta-literacy models, where you are now looking at all literacies brought together under one literacy: digital literacy, cognitive literacy, cultural literacy, data literacy, ideological literacy, all under a new model of meta-literacy, which will be help to empower users to be able to deal with meta challenges within the online environment. In a nutshell, I think I bring my contribution to its eclipse.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, that was brilliant. So we have the excellent Professor Oguamanam sitting before us. We have about 12 minutes to ask him questions, to test our views on him and get some response from him. So I'm going to take a wave of questions, not comments. Please don't say it's a comment and then give us a speech. I want questions, quick, to the point, so he can respond. Okay, Andrew's already bid for one.
Do you think that African Union policymakers on AI understand the importance of a proper settlement and protection of indigenous knowledge? And I'm going to quote from the African Union Development Agency, so AUDA-NEPAD's white paper, which they released last year. When was it? May? March 2024. AUDA-NEPAD released a white paper on AI, and it says IP rights should be afforded the same protection as any fundamental human right if the African continent is to be successful in deploying and reaping the benefits that are inherent in the use of AI technology. And it goes on to suggest that the reason that we haven't developed AI in Africa is not the need for vast data centers or the fact that AI so far developed has all been using English language, but that we need lots of patents. So I don't think their IP rights they're trying to protect there are traditional knowledge. I think they're Western IP. So to my mind, this suggests a threat to TK because they're going to want IP rights to override the human rights-based TK rights. Comment.
Thank you, Andrew. My take on this is that when we are navigating transformational technologies, policy making is nightmarish. Particularly, we know the rapidity of technological uptake. Most of us are scratching our head about, even as professors, how to deploy AI in the classroom as an instrument for pedagogy. And so for a policy institution like the African Union, my take personally is that, like there is saying that we should be the change that we want. Our ability as researchers, our capacity as youths who understand this technology better than policymakers. I keep saying CESLOS and the Wikimedia Project and the kind of things that we do. I mean, somewhere, somehow, people shut down the internet. Everybody has a way of getting around it. So it is what we do with these technologies in different sites that really influence policy. Even when they are going wrong or rogue, we can deploy technology to debunk them. So things are happening in a very fast pace that even policies that sound so glossy on paper are not sustainable 2 days after. So I'm more like pragmatic in relation to some of these big policy places. But there is no doubt that the influence of European Union on the African Union is phenomenal. And I don't know why. Thank you.
Thank you.
Prof. Chidi, I'm going to ask you, you had a lot of responses from this panel here. I wondered if you wanted perhaps to speak back to their reflections on your keynote.
I was going to declare an eclipse of, of my response to this. So these are my very good friends, and everything you've said appears to be like Professor Ncube started by saying, that stone on our shoes, actually. And if you asked me, I think it resonated with all the very nice responses, is the TK question. I mean, the best way I introduce feminist legal studies in my theory class is everybody will read all assigned readings and come to class. And I will say, what actually is feminism? Different brands of it. North American, African, blah, blah, blah. But where do they come together? You know, to push back against patriarchy and also to ask the woman question in every situation you find yourself. Because most of this is unconscious attempt, even those who mean well. If they are not conscious of the problem, the outcome of what they do undermines the situation they really want to protect. So I think a conscious awakening, which all of you captured about TK, is something that is urgently imperative. If we, and let me be clear, we tend to be so despondent that we are always latecomers. But there is what is called a latecomer advantage. Sometimes people rush to shun out a piece of legislation. Another person is a little more sober with some degree of trepidation, trying to understand what is going on, and they come out with a very, very powerful piece of legislation. So as a continent, we need to we now know how TK has been marginalized. We now know how much effort is going on in different fora to readdress that. We also now know the comparative advantage we have with regard to our youth. Okay, I'm possibly the last generation that saw a telephone that you pick up and ring and then drop it and go and do something. It rings again, you go back there. But we have youths who never knew what was an analog phone. And this is advantage that we have, but we now need to tell them, in all that you do, remember who you are and ask the traditional knowledge question. And that, for me, is actually what resonated through all these responses. And then, Alan, I was going to be emphatic with your attempt to really make the case for expression and TK proper. And that is very valid. I have not flushed it down the drain. But in the nuances and sophistication of culture, let me give you an example. In gastronomy, as an Igbo man from Nigeria, southern Nigeria, there is what we call oha soup, which is one of the best soups ever my mother could ever prepare. Any Igbo man knows this. Now, as a gastronomic expression of culture, you may call it TCEs. But listen, my mom is long gone. But when I perceive the smell of this, it's not that soup that I see. It comes with memories that words cannot express. There is a lot of sophistication about TKTCEs and, balkanizing knowledge systems that define a people into pigeonholes of Western disciplinary myopia is not acceptable. And this is what we should be teaching the new generation of Africans, particularly at a time when they have their cameras documenting stuff. Thank you.
Sorry, just one thing.
Yeah.
You now owe me that soup. I want to taste that soup.
So the joys of having your phone on you whilst chairing a session is because when Susan couldn't get us through Zoom, I sent her WhatsApp and I said, girl, tell me what you wanted to say. So she sent me a WhatsApp. This is the question that Susan wanted to ask. She wanted to ask this question particularly to Gloria and Sandra, and she wanted to ask how they ensure that information posted on the platforms is not mined. Now, I know that there is an answer to this. It is probably a long answer, Sue. I'm glad you're listening. And who shall we ask? Sandra, you're on stage. Are you willing to take this question? Give an answer?
Okay, I will attempt to answer to the question, and I don't know what platform she's referring to.
Any of those that you work on. Wikimedia ones, the examples you gave us.
Okay. So Slaus is here, he's also going to, he's like my go-to person. So usually when you post information or when you contribute information on Wikipedia, I think this is a conversation we had a day ago, whether maybe you're writing a woman's biography or anything. So usually there are admins or administrators who are trained to review what you have contributed on the platform and when it meets the criteria. So we have various criteria that we have on Wikipedia, such as right from a neutral point, and also about copyright or using anyone's work without referencing it. So what we do is also ensuring that information that is contributed on Wikipedia is being referenced. Again, work that we contribute, we entirely depend on secondary sources or information that has been contributed on mainstream media. So then this is reviewed, and then usually you have your account, and then you're sent an information that your information or your article has been approved. That means that the article has gone through various reviews and approval by the administrators. So now what is the gap in Africa is that we don't have African administrators, and that's what we are trying to see, how to train various credible Wikimedians, such as Ceslaus, and then a colleague of mine that some of you has been trained by Alice, to see how they can be administrators to ensure that African knowledge, indigenous knowledge is being preserved in a rightful way. And also we have administrators who understand what Africa is, because as I highlighted, most of the information contributed was from people from the global north, and that's what the narrative we want to change on Wikipedia. I hope I have able to answer your question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, you have. And Gloria also wants to add as well.
Thank you very much. Briefly, I talked about membership platform that we have for people that are interested in our data. So it gives us the opportunity to kind of see what people are doing. And of course, when you agree that you use the data, fair use and all that, whether it's commercial or academic, the truth is we really don't have the powers to enforce or to ensure that we are actually keeping up with the agreements we had with you. An example, somebody might come and say, I'm an African, I want to use your data for research purposes. And of course, we'll release the data to the person. But the person might turn around to also use it for commercial purposes. So that's what I mean, that when it comes to enforcement, we really haven't been able to, to go down that drain. We want to imagine that the people we are dealing with are honest and sincere enough to keep to their words or the words of the agreements. I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It does. So this has been a really fantastic panel. It really has been a Global South panel. We've had voices from Brazil, from Kenya, from Zimbabwe, from Uganda, Nigeria. It's been fantastic. Remember, we started off by saying we've got to think about the stone in our shoe. I think what Professor Oguamanam has done and the respondents and the discussants really is to take the stone out, examine it before all of us. We know its shape, we know its size, we know its weight. We should collectively have the research tools to pulverize the stone and make sure that it goes away. And we should not be limping. We should be stepping boldly into the future and towards lunch. We thank you.